You wanna get started? Or do you wanna wait a little bit longer?
Yeah, let's start on time. What's what we'll do from now on. No more excuses for being late.
We're gonna
Unless
use
unless one of us is late, then I'm sure we'll have an excuse.
sweet. Hide the junk that's always in the way. I'm probably not gonna watch the chat. So if you guys have any questions or anything, just feel free to speak up. Okay, so day 3, talking about CSS today. Day 2, we learned just kind of introductory HTML stuff. And so now we're going to talk about how to make it not look ugly. And so we kind of just got a little skeleton of some intro topics here, but we'll kind of reference this as needed. But if you guys want to follow, I don't know how you guys set it up in class, but it's pretty easy to follow if you just build a OKCoders folder with the curriculum-ish module 1, day 3, and you kind of follow that structure, and we'll just kind of keep going with that. Also, this repo is around, so you'll be able to pull everything we do after class also and look at it on GitHub. Okay, so we can go ahead and start out by creating, just like the last time, an index.html file. This will be the basis of everything we do for this. And also a new thing we'll go ahead and show is you just type HTML. VS Code is offering you some things here. One of them is this HTML:5. And if you just click that, this will build out kind of boilerplate things that every HTML document will have. We didn't talk about the head too much last time, but inside of the head is normally things that are just informational about the page. So there's some meta things here that you know, search engines and things can read about the page whenever they're looking for it. So those are here. You're never going to have to really mess with these a lot, so I wouldn't worry too much about them. The other one is just the title. This is what directly correlates to the top of the browser. So we'll go ahead and open this up live server here. So you see it says document there. You can change that to be OKCoders day 3 CSS. And you see that went ahead and changed there also. Something good to know. Sweet. Okay, so let's talk about in class we had like a div maybe that had just content inside, right? And we briefly mentioned that we have what's called the style attribute. And so you could put something in here like background color. You see it's auto-filling for me there. And we could just make this beige. We could have something like width and height. And these would be kind of straightforward. I think most people kind of understand just the pixel structure. So we have the box, 200 width and height, and it'll be beige, say content. So that shows up here. And so we are kind of doing CSS or something very similar to CSS, just doing that, just in a way that's not super common. Normally you wouldn't put your styles on, this is what's called the inline level. You would want to maybe isolate them somewhere separate. And so like, let's talk about like what are different alternatives to doing inline styles. One would be a style tag, which is an HTML element that lets you apply styles. Style tag HTML. And so this will go inside of your head. Oops. And so we'll talk about what's inside of here in a second. But so here's a style tag, and we can go ahead and just replace this here. And we'll just give this what is called a class. And so the class will be just my box. And so up here to target that, use this dot notation, and that should match the class down there. So we have color, make this background color. And what was it before? I don't even remember. Antique white, sure. Height 200 pixels. Width 200 pixels. And now we still have the same thing as well. So that is an alternative to doing inline styles, as you can give it what's called a class. And so a class, let's see if we can hover this, allows CSS JavaScript to select and access specific elements via the class selectors. So it's just basically a name that you can give to any element. You could even put a class on like something like a body, or you could put it on any element, and you can put a class on every element for the same class. Let's say I have another div, and it's going to be more content, and you could also give this the same class here. And so now I've got two boxes that both have the same class applied. So they both have the same styles applied. And so instead of doing style background height width on here and then doing style background height width on here, now we've separated that logic into being one thing here. And so instead of calling it my box, we can just call it like styled box. And so now anytime we want a styled box, we can apply this class name to it. And so for every single kind of box that we want to use that has these styles, we can apply that to it. Okay, so this is one option, is using a style tag, using inline styles. The third option is going to be putting all of your CSS in a separate file and having it live on its own. And so we'll look at setting that up. We'll go ahead and make a new folder. We'll make a CSS, call it CSS, and inside of that, we'll just make a styles.css. Okay, so inside of here, we can actually just take all of this same content and put that there. And then inside of here, we should be able to comment the style out, and it breaks. Does anyone know maybe why this doesn't work anymore?
You aren't declaring the style sheet?
Right. So right now we have an HTML page and we have some random CSS file, but they're not linked by anything. And so to link them, we'll need to figure out how to link CSS to HTML. So this is kind of following the same things here. So we're talking about a style, and then in an internal using a style tag, and then an external CSS is what we're looking for. And they have this here called a link that lives also inside of the head tag. So we can have a link. It's going to say the relation is that it's linking a style sheet. There are other things that you can link. I don't know if it'll give me other options. There are other things that you can link here. Other files that HTML might need to know about. And then here in the href, this is going to be similar to an anchor tag, where it's going to just have a path to that thing that we're trying to link to. So we can say inside of our CSS folder, there you see in autofilling, we have misspelled styles. This doesn't even look like a word anymore. Awesome. So now we have successfully linked our styles from our CSS file into this HTML file that we have built in. Awesome. Okay, so we've got that now. Let's talk about what a class is and what are some alternatives to a class, right? So here we've got this styled box, and you can see that, right? Like we can apply that to multiple elements and give them all the same style. But what if I want something to be only for one thing in my page? So like say I've got a logo at the top, and I want to style just that logo, or like just one image, and it's not going to be something generic that should go everywhere. So we can do maybe like the HTML, the OK Coders logo. So let's take this, copy it, paste it into day 3. Nice. Okay, so we're gonna have an image, and we're gonna say source rules. That, we'll say alt. It's gonna be our OK Coders logo. Okay, so on here, if we actually reference our day 2, I think we did an ID somewhere in here. Yeah, so similar to how here we have a input with the ID of name so that this label could find it. That is the most specific way to name. So like there can be no 2 inputs that have this same ID. That would throw an error in the browser. And we can look at that on the other side. But we can use this same ID attribute that exists on this element and style specifically based on that ID. So let's go in here and say we have this image, and we can say ID equals OK Coders logo, right? And so to style that, let's just go ahead and, so we've got that here. This is how it came in naturally. So to style that, we can go to our style CSS file, and we can target it by ID. And so to do that, instead of using the dot notation, we're going to use a hashtag or an octothorpe if you're fancy. And then we can say height is going to be 50 pixels. Sweet. Okay, so now we have this logo, and that is 50 pixels. What other options do we have other than the ID in the class? We also have an element. So this one is kind of cool. So if we have a unordered list here with some list items inside, let's do it like this. Give them all actually don't need this. So you could give them all a class if you wanted to style all of them, right? But let's say we want to change how every list item in our entire application looks, or at least every application, every file that this matches. We can style just those list items directly as an element. And so to do that, you don't need any notation in front of it. It's just the element name. So for list items, what does that want? Empty rule sets, okay. Let's say we want all of our list items to have the color purple. Okay, so now all of these don't have anything ID or class wise that should be styling them, but we are styling all list items. That purple one's super colorblind. Let's pick a brighter color. How about yellow? Nice. Yeah, that's better. So now we have some nice, beautiful list items. So every list item in our entire app will now match this. So let's say that I have some list items that we want to be styled differently, because this is, kind of blanketing our entire app and styling the entire thing. And we want to just override that styles. So we can do something like just this one, style equals color blue. So this overrides that. And so whenever you put a style tag on an element itself, that has a higher priority than the CSS that's applied to it. We can leave that there. Check our cheat sheet, see how we're doing. Yeah, we can also talk about this one real quick, and we'll go back to that. There's more options than this also on ways to select elements. These are just, we're kind of talking about the most common ones that will actually be useful. This is one that you can see sometimes, and this is selecting every element that is in your code. And so let's just say like overall, we want a font size that is actually just bigger than the usual 16 pixels. So we'll say all fonts should be 20 pixels. And so now everything in the code is sized up regardless of what element it belongs to. Okay. Let's go through some common properties and we'll get back to the higher level stuff. So common properties, we've already seen width and height and background color. And a lot of these will feel familiar if you've done anything like just regular text editing in Word or something. You know, you always have text align center, stuff like that. And that's all as you would expect. You've got font size, you've also got margin and padding. Margin, also something familiar if you've done text editing. Padding is kind of different. So let's talk about those. So we've got our box here. Let's give it some margin of 10 pixels. So now you can see that there's a space of 10 pixels all the way around our box, and that's on the outside of the box because we have margin. Another common one is padding. It's going to be 20 pixels. And so padding is the opposite of margin. Padding is the inside of the box. We want that same space. And so margin 10 pixels on the outside, padding is 20 pixels from the inside. So everything inside of it needs to be pushed 20 pixels away from all of the edges, right? So these are kind of the most common things. And there are so many attributes. Is that the right name? Properties. Yeah, there we go. There's so many properties in CSS that it'd be impossible to talk about the niche of every single little one. So as we go through this course, we'll kind of just cover some of the most familiar ones, get you familiarized with just some of the most common ones that you would use day to day. Does anyone have any questions about any of this so far? Sweet. Okay, so that's all pretty straightforward, right? Most of this is, you know, we've just selected one thing, selected a group of things, or selected all of the things and applied those styles. And that's kind of how CSS generally works, is in most cases, I've got a group of list items that I want to style together in one way. Think about something like, let's say, we'll just go back to Starbucks. Like we land on this page, they have these 3 items here, and they all have the same styles, right? They want them all to be styled in the same way. So they could apply the style to each of them directly, or they could, you know, give them all an ID and style each one specifically individually. But if they're going to style them all the same, then they will give them a class name and say like class name link or a class name list item, and style all of their list items to match. Sweet. Okay, so let's talk about some units. So we looked at pixels. That's the one that, you know, you're probably familiar with. There's also rem and m. And so these are going to be relative units. And so we've got, let's make something new here. Make a anchor tag just to diversify what everything we're using. Does anybody know what attribute is important for an anchor tag?
href.
Href, sure. So that's going to be the href. Too many of those. And this is going to be the good old link to Google. Sweet.
Can it be? I didn't know it could be self-closing.
It cannot, because it needs some content.
Okay. Okay. I thought I was, yeah, okay.
You're right.
That's a React thing.
Mm,
I will learn later.
Okay, so inside of this, we want to put the content of this link, and so we'll just say link to Google. Google. There we go. Okay, so we want to give this an ID because it's going to be our only link to Google. So this is going to be our link. Google link. So back in our CSS, we can come in here and give this an ID of Google link. And inside of here, we want to give this a font size of 1 rem. Okay, so let's look at what that did. We've got a link. It looks like it's 1 rem. And so we inspect that. I'm using Command Option I to open this. And then this is the special picker right here, and we want to look at this element. So you can see there font size is 1 rem, but if you look at this, it'll tell you exactly what the value is that the browser is using, because rem is going to convert from the values. So it's going to convert it to pixels. And so in this case, it looks like it's 20 pixels. And so why is it 20 pixels? Well, what a rem does is, let's see if this will tell us. So it's going to take your font size, which the default font size is 16 pixels, and it's going to apply that multiplier times whatever value. So we have 1 rem. So it's saying 1 times 16 equals 16. But in this case, we overrided our font size of our entire application to be 20 pixels. And so now it's saying 1 times 20 pixels is 20 pixels. So if we say 1.5 rems, now this should be 1.5 times 20, which would be 30 pixels. And so this gives you the flexibility to scale your entire app, let's say for different sized clients, different sized views. We want all of our fonts to match. And so instead of saying, hey, I want this to be 13 pixels and this one to be 15 pixels, so you can build out a sizing guide, you can set them all to be based on the root font size, and then just change the font size based on your screen size. Something like that. And so this is going to flex based on your screen size. Based on your font size. Sorry. Sweet. So we've got a 30 pixel thing here. Let's look at what M's do. So we've got a link. It's another sweet tag. Anything? Sure, we've got a button. Okay, so we've got the good old click me button. And inside of here, we want to give this a class because, maybe we want to apply this to multiple buttons. And we can just call this big button. Oh, can't make a class like that. Big button. So also, we can talk about that real quick. So if you want multiple classes to apply to one element, you can separate them by space. So let's say here we have big button, but we also want to have the styled box classes, and you could have space, styled box, and both of those would apply. So in this case, we've got our big button class, and we need to go over here, and we need to say for the big button, we want to give those a font size of 2 rem, not rem, M. Okay, so we've got a button with a big old font size, 40 pixels, right? It's kind of what you would expect, pretty similar. If we were going to use rem, then 40 pixels is 2 times 20, which is our font size set for our application. And so that math checks out, right? So it's like, why is it different than rem? Well, for M, it actually is based on the parent's font size. And so since here the parent is the same font size as everything else, it is going to act regularly. But if we change that, let's say we've got a wrapper here, to wrap our button, we're going to want to have a div or any container. And we can say this is going to be trying to diversify. It's not common to use ID all the time. Like if you're just trying to style items, class is the most commonly used, I would say. And so like if I wanted to style this button, I'd normally use a class instead of an ID. Even if I only have one, it's just IDs are very specific. And so that has like the most weight to it, right? And so using a class makes it you know, more standard, and you don't have to worry about doing, is this a class, is this an ID? It's kind of common to just use classes for a lot, unless it's, you know, we need it to be an ID, so that way we can override a class that's applied to it or something like that. And we'll talk about that also. Okay, so for this ID, we want to just say container. And so we come in here and we want to make a container. And so inside of this container, and if the font size be equal to, let's make it really big and ugly. So we've got a 40 pixels font size for this container. And now you can see this button has 80 pixels. And so we're just multiplying every single time, right? And so we've got 40 pixels is the container. This big button exists within the container. And so it's going to take the font size of the container, which is 40, and multiply it by the value put here, which is 2. So that's why we got 80 pixels. Sweet. Okay, so we've got this container. And let's go ahead and give this a background color so we can define it. And let's make this something ugly. Like crimson, sure. Sweet. So we've got this button that's still big, and here's its container is now defined in crimson. And so let's look at another common unit. So we've got rems and ems based on font size. You can use rems and ems to define properties that aren't font size. They're still based on font size though. So let's take another look at this big button real quick. So the font size is 2 ems, but you can also make something like the width be 2 em. And so now the width is also equal to twice the font size of the parent, right? And so you could apply that to anything that takes a length, like width, height, you know, any value that's a number like font size, all of that will apply. Sweet. Okay, so what is another one that is important is the percentage, and this one's super common for using responsive UIs. And so that is like, I've got a screen that is this wide and I want it to be able to shrink, and I want something to match always. And so we want to use a percentage of that container, right? So let's say we've got this div here with the container, and it's got a width. Currently, it's just the div, so the width is the full scope. It's all the way across. And so inside of this big button, instead of using a width 2em, we want to say width is 50%. And so that will now be exactly half of its container. Even if we do this, you can see it is changing widths, and it is always half of the parent. If we had a big button that existed outside of this parent, it's still 50%, but this is now 50% of its direct parent, which is all the way to the top is this body tag, and the body exists the full width, right? But how about, let's say, to diversify what we have here, we've got the container, and then we've got another div. Let's put our big button inside of that. We'll save that. Looks the same. Hasn't done anything yet. Inside of here, we've got another ID. This is going to be our wrapper. So inside of a wrapper, we want to say the width of this is going to be 200 pixels. And so now you can't even see the wrapper, right? There's nothing to notate that the wrapper is there, but you can see that our button here is now 100 pixels because its width is defined by half of its parent, which is 200 pixels. You can see it there. So there is the wrapper. You can also, the browser will show you here. It's like div ID wrapper. Also super important to be able to just like look at this and not freak out because it looks like a lot, right? But it is just HTML and CSS classes that are displaying here. So this helps you pick through what is on the page and see how they're doing this. So we've got a big button. It's inside of a wrapper. The wrapper is not doing a lot except for defining the width of the button. Oh yeah, and so if we stretch this, that button's not changing width because width is defined by its parent, which is a static 200 pixels. All right, so then the last ones that are super common are VW and VH. That stands for view width and view height. And you can see I made a little note here. It's 1% of the view width and 1% of the view height. And so we've got a, let's mess with our OK Coders logo. Put this at the top here. So we've got our ID, so we can style that. OK Coders logo. So the height is 50 pixels, but we want the width to be 50 VW. And so like I said, that's 1% of the view width. And so now it's super stretched because you don't normally want to set both of those. Nice. And so you can see that this is 50% of the view width. And that kind of functions similarly to this down here, 50% of its parent, which is also 100 VW by default. And so to specify that and why that's different is if I had put this OK Coders logo inside of something that has a defined width, this will always be 50 VW anyways, because it's not defined by its parent. And so let's go into here and let's say we can even just do a div and make it a container, not a container because we made this a div. Can you just make this a class? Container class. And so now this would apply to any container, which making any container have 40 pixels would be something crazy, but for this case, we want it to stand out and be ugly so we can see what's happening. But so we've got a div. We can give it the class of container. And so our container will have a width. Let's do something weird, 30 rems. Not even sure what that would end up to be, but let's see. Cover your container. Yeah, sure, 600. Basic math is hard. Nice. So we've got this container that is red, and you can see that the logo doesn't care because it says, hey, I've got to be 50% of this view width. And so it's going to come outside of that parent no matter what, because it's going to make sure that it stays 50% of this container or 50% of the view width. Awesome. View height is the same, just vertically, right? So we want to make a, let's try to make something that's less ugly. So you can make a header. What am I doing here? Maybe there's a cheat code. There it is. So that was, if you're in VS Code and you do a dot, and when you start typing, this is going to define a div, and it's going to apply that class name to it. And so it'll write that out for you. So just a little shortcut there for you. Okay, so inside of our header, we're actually gonna do another div here. And this is going to be welcome to Goes. Nice. We can just make this on page 1. Okay, so inside of our header, we want to give it a height of 20 VH and something to make it stand out so we can see it. Make it aqua, sure. Okay, so now this is 20 VH. Probably you're not gonna be able to eyeball that, but see that it changes. This is also a useful tool here that is built into Chrome. This lets you view things in a responsive way, so you can change the width of your thing without having to mess around with like resizing this and stuff. And you can also change the height of it there also. So you can see this size is shrinking. And so it's always going to be, since we said 20, it's always going to be a fifth of the view height, and adjust that there. Sweet. Check our cheat sheet, see where we're at. Okay, so those are the common units. We've looked at some common properties. Let's talk about selectors. And so we talked about applying multiple classes to a single one. So let's say I want something to be blue. So we've got a big button, but we also just want something to be blue, or like blue text or something, right? And so we can say color blue. And so you could apply this class to any element and it would just give the color blue. And so this is like kind of like a utility class that you could just apply to anything, and it wouldn't matter. So let's say big button is also going to be blue. And so I may want a lot of elements. What did I say? Blue text. So we may want a lot of elements that have blue text, and we could apply that here, right? And we may want a lot of big buttons, but those aren't always necessarily together. So it makes sense to separate those styles into their own separate classes, but they can be applied to the same element. And right, that's with the space to separate that it's two different classes. And so now we should have our big button that has blue text. Still very pretty. But let's say we want to apply one style to multiple selected items, and we can select them in different ways. And so how would we do that? So got a little cheat sheet here because I always forget every time. So if we want to apply it to many classes, but have the same style applied to that class, we can do that. So let's say we've got a container class that already exists, and then we've got a header class that already exists. And we want both of those to have margin 10 pixels. And so now this is going to apply a margin of 10 pixels to everything that has both, as well as the container will also have its own styles and the header will also have its own styles, but both of them will have margin 10 pixels. Which one do I make a header? Nice. So you can kind of see blue is the box itself, and this yellowy color that's around it is highlighting the margin for us. And so we've got a margin around this box. Should be, yeah, that box as well is also applied. And then what would we make our containers? The crimson thing. Okay, sure. Yeah, so these are both having margin 10 pixels applied. You can see if you click that here, it has container is highlighted because it knows that it's a container class, margin 10 pixels. Click this one, highlighting the header because no, it's the header class, margin 10 pixels. So it's applied to both, right? Also notice there's not 20 pixels here between them because the margins aren't bumping each other out of the way. they are just, hey, nothing can be within my 10 pixels, and they both agree to that. So there's just a 10 pixel range in between them. Sweet. So that's how to apply the same style to multiple classes. What if we want to apply something really specific? All styles that match and have a matching child. So let's say we've got this UL and these LIs, right? Or even something like this. So we've got this div of wrapper and we've got this button. And so we can style every div with that has a wrapper, which in this case it's an ID. So it's about, we'll go back to this UL. So we're just going to call this class of my list. Okay, so go over here. And we can say my list. We can have styles, font size. Let's do something that you guys used to, some of these weirder stuff. 1.3 grams, right? So now everything in the list should be I don't think our list items care. What is 1.3 grams? 25 or something? 205. Maybe a clean number. Still 20 pixels. Okay, anyway, so let's target this now. We want to say, so for this one, it's got this inline style. For this one, we want to say ID is second item. So for some reason, we want to style this one particularly right. Second list item, sweet. Okay, so we come back in here. We've got this class that applies to the list, but we want to apply something to the list and just to that second item. So anytime something has this parent and this child, second item, we want to have a bigger font size. And see, we can, man, we need to change this color. That is ugly. What's a good color?
So wouldn't you just do that to the same? So for the list items, you do like .my dash list, and then the li element after to apply that styling to those list items.
Yeah, you could.
Is that where you're? Yeah.
So I think the reason that these aren't taking this font size from whenever I had just my list, like if I did my list and then I could do something like this. So all list items that are within my list have font size of 1.3 rounds, or we can even do smaller, like 0.8 rounds. And so now all of those get styled. And I think the reason that it wasn't cascading is because we have this. And so this is saying, hey, that list item is supposed to be font size 20 pixels. And that overrided the parent cascading with nothing specifying the list item itself, right?
Okay, so normally it would apply to it.
Yeah, let's test that. So everything got super smaller because we made all of the text not be 20. It's all tiny, tiny. So we should say let's do something not based on rems. Yeah, so these are 12 pixels now. And if I comment this out, I would expect them to be 16 pixels.
Ah,
Yeah, and so that's because we were globally setting everything, which this took precedence on that list item higher than just my list cascading font size down to its children. So we
Makes
had
sense.
to explicitly say, we want those list items to have this font size for it to decide that that was more important than this. Sweet. Okay, so this is something that is like, it's not that common, and that's important to know. And that's why, you're not going to remember this, so I got to look it up every time. This is more common, like I don't apply the same generic style to many classes. But styling a child of something is only like niche cases where you're needing to like, you're working with maybe a style sheet that's coming from somewhere else online, and you need to just override that. And so it's like, let's say maybe there was some, man, if I could type some other style from that, like this is something we've not defined but exists in our HTML, right? And so we want to just target an L item, a list item inside of that. That may be a case, but that's a little outside of the scope of what we're doing right now. Okay, and then the other like final thing is that there may be many big buttons, and there may be many things with blue text. Big button. What am I doing? Big button. Blue text. And if we want to target ones that have both of these classes specifically, then you would say dot big button dot blue text. And so now we could apply something, we could apply styles to something that has both of those classes. And so now this is also something that is not super common, just, good to know about. And so we want to say we want a background color of something ugly. Nice. All right. We've got a couple buttons here, right? This one is blue text and a big button. So it's got an orange background, it's got blue text, and it's got this height and width assigned to it. This one's just class blue text. So it's just blue text, no orange background, no height and width. Weird. This one is just big button. So it has no orange background and no blue text. Sweet. Okay. And then this is something that can get more complicated, but I think just the most common ones are pretty straightforward. So focus and hover style. So these are kind of like states on specific elements, right? So focus is generally used for things like maybe inputs, buttons, stuff like that. And so we're going to have an input, and it's going to have a class of style input. This folder, put some text. Okay, so our styled input, we need a class for that. Define a class for that. And we want to just say height is 40 pixels. Put in a div so we can just kind of separate what we're doing here. And let's also just do some ugly inline styles for quickness. You can also, the auto suggest is very powerful. And so you can see we've talked about margin, but there's a lot of other options for margin that are more specific. So I want to do a margin, but I want to do it just on the top of the element, just on the left of the element, the bottom, the right. And then some of the stuff is less common, but let's just say margin top. So only a margin on the top, and we can just say 200 pixels. And then we can just say margin bottom 200 pixels. And so this is just going to put a lot of space around it. Now we can mess with it. Okay, so you can see there's already, get out of this. There's already styles here from the browser whenever it's focused. That is the state here, right? It has our focus when we click on it. And so the browser styles this to have this blue border on it. We want to, like, whenever we try to type in this input, we want it to like make it important for some reason. So we want to like make it bigger. So right now it has height 40 pixels. And so we want to say got styled input, and then we, if you use this colon after your class name, you can type in some of these pseudo classes, one of them being hover. And we want to give it a height of something noticeable, so 80 pixels. So we're doing hover, not focus, but hover here, I think I did said one, did the other, but you see whenever we hover it, it becomes twice as big. Let's talk about the focus one too. And so whenever we focus it, we want the background color. I just do these because they're, you know, familiar and easy to use. So, and we'll make the color white. That is the text color. So whenever we focus it, oh, it's color, not white. We need like a, it's not a thing. Oh, it is white, just the placeholder text isn't white. Cool. So whenever I'm hovering, it's getting bigger. Whenever I'm focusing it, it's flipping styles there. And so those are pretty common for things like buttons. See, there's also a hover style here. And so you could override some of the styles on the browser's default hover styles. If you didn't want any hover styles, you could just, you know, remove that style on hover also. I think for, am I able to do this here? Oh, I need it, and doesn't matter. There's a way, I don't remember, there's a way to put this in here. Zach, do you remember that syntax for that? And
I wasn't paying attention.
you know the syntax to do, like, I've got this class and I've got this class hover, but you can define the hover in here. Some number of ampersands and colons.
And yeah,
I think it's just an ampersand. Space colon. 2 ampersand. We can Google that later, but we're getting pretty close. Does anyone have any questions about any of these other CSS tools? No questions. All right, so now at the end of all of this, we have this very beautiful document with very pretty styles. Sweet. And so these are just some of like basic styling. We'll get into building out things and trying to, you know, make things look pretty. But for now, this is just to get acquainted with applying classes, IDs, and to different elements, to singular elements, to all of your elements, and just kind of empower you to be able to go out, find any style. I think there should be CSS properties. So this is like every CSS property. There's borders. There's all kinds of stuff. Cursor, this one's pretty common. Like if you want it to be like, for example, my cursor now is this thing for whenever I'm highlighting text, whenever I'm off of that, it's just a regular pointer. Whenever it's on a link, it's a finger, just things like that. And so anytime you're going to style something, you have this whole vast knowledge of stuff at your hands in the documentation. It's important to familiarize yourself with that and to come back to this because it would take years and years and years to memorize every possible style, right? Sweet. Okay, so let's look at, got 4-ish minutes. Go back to our Starbucks. I think they changed it. Maybe on a different page somehow. Similar thing here though, right? Let's all look at, take the last couple minutes of class. We want to make this button and make it just look as similarly to this without cheating and inspecting it. Try to, how would you make these same styles using your reference here? I'm going to kill my screen so I can do it also. Okay, kind of running out of time here, so I will post a screenshot of what mine looks like and what my code looks like right after class ends. But probably go ahead and call it here. If you guys want to show off yours or make them fancy, you are welcome to do so, and you can post that in a thread and see who can make the prettiest one. Now you are empowered by the most basic knowledge of HTML and CSS to just go out and build anything. And so at this point, you could build just like something like what Starbucks has here. It's just like a static site that just shows you content. The knowledge of design and all that kind of stuff on how things should look, that'll just come from experience and from building these things over time. And so it's important to just try to replicate things. So just go to Facebook and just try to find a little small piece of it and just build that. It doesn't have to function or do anything, but just make it look the same. And that's a good way to kind of build up in your mind, like, hey, I see something, how would I build it? How would I make it look exactly like that? Sweet.
Sweet. Thanks, Braden. Just a reminder, Saturday is more of a working class, so there won't be instruction. But we will have guided projects for you all to work on with your teams. So usually we like to let those be longer. And so I would, if you can, we've done those up to 4 hours before. Yeah, plan on spending definitely more than 2 hours. They don't always go for 4. But we will provide kind of a guided project for you. And those days are usually really fun. So just make sure you're ready and prepped for that. And see you guys on Saturday.
Sounds like a plan. I will be there.
Cool.